The President of the Royal College of Surgeons will today argue that the NHS waiting list will not fall unless billions of pounds is invested into it. Keir Starmer has previously said that he will not raise taxes to increase NHS funding. But what do you think? Should taxes be raised and the money pumped into the NHS? Or would this just mean more money is going to be wasted and wouldn't actually solve the larger issue? Emily, what do you think about this?
Well, I'm going to give you a straight answer, Storm, for once. I think, yes, taxes... I know. Hold on to your seats, guys.
Okay.
Hold on to your seats. Yes, I think taxes should be raised to put more money into the NHS. Now, I should say that, obviously, the Prime Minister has said that Labour won't raise taxes, but what the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is contemplating is changing, essentially, the fiscal rules so that she can raise 50 billion in terms of UK borrowing. It's just I'm not an economist, but it's just so that we can then borrow more money and put the money into the NHS. I mean, I was woken up in the middle of the night by my son this morning, and so at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock this morning, I was reading a witness statement to the COVID inquiry by Dr. Kevin Fong. I think you probably talked about it a couple of weeks back. There were some headlines about, how nurses were having to wear diapers during COVID because it was so awful. Anyway, it was, 4 o'clock this morning reading 35 pages. I mean, it was talking particularly about intensive care units, and that's one going into the weeds of the NHS. The NHS is a lot of things. It's GP surgeries, it's hospitals, but looking at intensive care units, and one of the reasons that we were hit so badly during COVID is because, for political reasons, A&E departments, intensive care units, only hold a very small number of beds permanently. So then when you're kind of slightly overwhelmed in comparison to other rich income countries. So particularly European countries in the US. And so when we were obviously then, as he described it and as other NHS professionals described it, hit with a terrorist attack every day, it meant that hospitals were overwhelmed. I mean, there are a number of issues here with the NHS, one of which is COVID, because of course, reading his witness statement, he said, everything was put on hold. Anything, elective, non-elective surgery was put on hold because of COVID, and we are still waiting lists.
The crux of what you're saying is that more money will fix the problem. So whether that is borrowed or taxes raised, more money is going to fix it.
Invest more money in the infrastructure. In June and July, I was in hospital quite a few times with my kids. The infrastructure is crumbling. I think we need to have the retention rate. I think 22,000 nurses left the NHS in 2022 after COVID. We need to have more doctors, we need to have more nurses, and the money needs to go into all of those areas.
Well, Emily's not wrong. The infrastructure is crumbling. I had to get an emergency dental appointment. I went into the waiting room and half the ceiling had just fallen down. We were all just sitting in a waiting room with the half the roof off. Not ideal, is it, Wilfred? How do you solve that problem?
Look, even the Labour Party has admitted that the NHS is broken. Everybody accepts that it's broken. Everybody will have a story about how awful it is. And it's at this moment we have a choice to look at it and say we need to totally dramatically change it rather than pumping money into a broken system. The way that the NHS was set up when it was, the needs of the patients is very, very, very different. And one of the things that we have to let go of is this sacred taboo that it's free at the price of entry. Because actually, until we come to terms with that, we're going to be going round and round and round in the same sort of circle. Because I think...
Do you think people should pay?
What I think we should be doing is that we should be looking at our European neighbours who we think that the NHS is the best in the world. It isn't. We have to come to terms that it isn't. We have to look at what our European neighbours are doing and actually seeing whether that is better than the system that we have. And I think that if there is some form of responsibility, and that responsibility usually means you get out your credit card that you pay for, you might actually get it rebated, but there's got to be some sort of action that actually you don't just walk in and get it for free.
But hold on, that would mean that only those with money were able to receive...
No, I'm not saying that. No,
what about people that are on benefits?
Everybody goes down to the fact is that, if you don't have money, you can't use it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there needs to be some form of responsibility. And even if you have to give your credit card over to actually, for example, when you're going online, they'll put a 0 on. and therefore they'll only take the money out if you spent it. I would say, right, if you don't turn up for your appointments, you know, it comes out of your, you have to pay for it.
Missed appointments is somewhere where people talk about it all the time, that you could make some money back. The problem when it comes to missed appointments, what do we do when we have a person that is suffering from dementia? What do we do when we have a person that's suffering from mental health issues?
But we cannot have a system.
We're going to perpetually charge them for missing appointments. We cannot have a system where we don't make changes because a small minority of people might have issues. And this is what's wrong with the NHS at the moment, is that we're geared for the small minority. We need to come up with some systems that's going to look after these people, but we cannot have a system that then means that everybody... So we'd have to get some sort of insurance, you think?
Some sort of
you're
insurance.
Paying into, which is, I mean...
But could I also say, the wrong people to be talking about the NHS are the people working in the NHS. I think it needs people outside of it to be looking in to say, actually, these are the things that we could see that needs changing. I've been...
Like business people?
It doesn't have to be business people, anybody.
Are we going back to management consultants then?
No,
the greatest will in the world.
I'm not saying management consultants, but I'm saying that a lot of people that will go into the NHS will just see there are things that could be sort of done better.
OK, let's go to the calls. Kevin from Angus, you're up first. Do you agree with Wilfred that actually we just need a complete overhaul of the NHS? It is a system that doesn't function with our demographic at the moment.
Yeah, because the middle management needs to be removed. For the last 15 plus years, there's been too many middle management, and you remove the red tape, you free up all that money, which can be used for the patients and get nurses on the floors. The reason I'm saying this, I work in the NHS. My mother worked in the NHS, and she said this before she retired 15 years ago.
OK, and Kevin, I appreciate your experience, but isn't the red tape there for the reason? Isn't it there to keep us safe?
Too much red tape.
What could be dropped then? Give me an example of a bit of red tape.
After middle management. When my mother worked, she was a community psychiatric nurse manager. When she tried to get patients in, she couldn't get half them in because of the amount of red tape she had to go through to get them in.
But what are we talking about in practice here? Because you say red tape and I'm imagining forms being filled in, but give me in practical terms, somebody comes in, they can't be admitted because why?
Because the doctor refuses to sign the paperwork to admit them.
And why would the doctor refuse to do that?
Because they don't think that they should be going in when it's quite obvious the patients need to go in, and they're not listening to the experts who are dealing with the patient day in, day out, like what my mum did.
Well, then that's an argument then between nurses and doctors. It sounds like a doctor is saying this person doesn't need to...
Management. Bed managers will not allow them in. I work in the ambulance service. I have went to get patients to take them home, and there's not been a care package in place, so I can't take them home. But the bed manager wants them out of the ward.
Well, and then that goes into the social services and the fact that we don't have anywhere for particularly older people to go after hospital.
They could have a care package in place, but the bed manager doesn't care.
OK, Kevin. Kevin makes a point about middle managers, and anytime we do a subject on the NHS and funding it, we do hear this argument. So perhaps there's something in it, Emily.
Well, I totally hear Kevin, and I hear his experience and his mum's experience, but the thing that immediately came to mind when he was speaking was Lucy Letby. And she was the nurse up in the north of England who was working in the children's intensive care unit, and it was middle managers who spotted that, or who realised that maybe there was something happening on the paediatric intensive care ward at this particular hospital, and asked another doctor to do a review and find out why these babies who had been in intensive care but were doing OK suddenly were going into cardiac arrest, or suddenly. And it was because of middle managers that picked that up. Because if you are a clinician, look, I'm not a clinician, but if you are a clinician, a doctor, a nurse, you are there to save lives. That is your absolute métier, and you are there, so you can't see the bigger picture. You can't stand back to see the bigger picture, and that's what middle managers do. They also have to do things like, they have to do the rota. They have to do things like, procurement and things like that.
Somebody has to do the rota, a rubbish job, but somebody has to do it.
Someone has to do it.
When you've got a beast like the NHS, I mean, I don't know how many middle managers there are and whether there are too many, but I imagine you need quite a number of
You shouldn't have a beast.
Managers.
The problem is that you shouldn't have a beast. You've got.
But if you don't and you make it all localised, then you've got a postcode lottery.
But let me give you an example. I mean, I was trying to make an appointment just 2 days ago into a hospital of my choice, a hospital in London. I cannot make that hospital choice because actually the way the system is built, it has to be based around where you live, whether that's GP, whether it's hospital. So
Yeah, but you
don't really have choice. Pardon?
Do you not have a few hospitals around you?
No, but if I
from?
choose to use, one of the reasons I wanted to use the hospital in London is because that's where I had my treatment when I had my leukemia.
Oh, okay.
And so the thing about the system is that it doesn't really give people choice, is that you've got to fit into their system. So I believe that if you give people more choice and more freedom, it will free up and make the system more efficient rather than them dictating where you can and you can't go.
Dave from Lancaster, what's your view on the NHS? Do we need to put more money in, or is there something else we could be doing?
Morning, Storm. Morning, everybody.
Morning, Dave.
Morning. You can tax the very, very wealthy, right? Those right at the top of the tree, like Wilfred, you know.
Okay.
You're talking about the kind of green policy here where they wanted a wealth tax. I think it was of those with assets over 10 million. They were going to tax them a one-off charge of 1%.
Yeah, but there's two other points here. Firstly, if you tax the average man in the street, you're going to stunt growth because you're taking money from him that he's going to put in the economy. And also, we don't want cures, we want customers is on Google, and you will find that popping pills is a profitable business, and so keeping people sick makes money for pharmaceutical companies, and that's the dilemma that the NHS has got.
Okay, well, we're veering into the territory here of suggesting that the NHS is trying to keep people sick. I don't think we think that the NHS is trying to keep people sick, but you might have something in the fact that prevention is better than cure, absolutely. So maybe we all need to look after ourselves a little bit better. And if we keep eating rubbish and we keep, doing things that we shouldn't do, smoking, drinking, all the rest of it, we're going to be really putting more and more pressure on the NHS, and we need to take responsibility for that and stop it.
Yes, we do. We don't want to stop eating rubbish, but rubbish, again, sold creates more profit than mum being at home making good, wholesome meals from fresh
What about
vegetables.
Dad, Dave? What about Dad? What about Dad staying at home making some wholesome meals, Dave?
Sorry, yes, Dad can stay at home and do them as well. Yes, I agree. Absolutely.
Nice and equal there at the end, Dave. Thank you very much for your call. Diane from Wolverhampton, what's your view on the NHS? Do we need to put more money in?
Well, I think it needs to be overhauled. I worked for the NHS for 20 years. I've just retired, and a lot of money is wasted, to be honest with you. It needs to overhaul the whole system. Too much money is spent on administration, bureaucracy. There's a lot of managers. There's some managers, they've got a title, I don't even know what they do, and it costs a lot of money. And they need to spend a lot of money on computers and spend a lot of money on paperwork. I can spend hours. I used to spend hours on one patient doing their paperwork. That's less time with your patient.
Diane, because we hear this from GPs as well, who are also overstretched and we don't have enough of them. We hear that paperwork is a big problem. Now, could this paperwork be done on computers if we got better software in place so you didn't have to repeat things all the time? Or what's the issue with paperwork? What could we get rid of? How could we make that quicker and easier?
I think some quite clever person needs to go in and slim it down. There's too much of it, and the fact is people have not got time to read it. It takes time to read all that.
That's
people to cover themselves, they'll write reams and reams and reams. And it's less time with your patient. The patients, the care, the actual care is less because you've got people sat in the office on a computer doing paperwork. And yet, if they don't do the paperwork, they're in trouble.
And Diane's right, that's right. So people are just covering themselves.
They are covering themselves. To be frank, occasionally they write something that, it might not have been said. Not very often, but it does happen to cover themselves.
Diane,
because that's what.
Thank you. Sorry, hold on. I want to get another call in, but a quick question from Emily.
Diane, I wanted to ask: do you think AI could be used at all with helping with the paperwork?
Probably could, because if it's programmed properly, it might be useful. Yes.
I have to say, I went for my maternity check-in appointment a couple of weeks ago, and there was quite a bit of repetition in that, and the computer seemed a bit sticky, and I feel like that appointment could have been much shorter if it not for the midwife. She was fabulous, but the form that you had to fill in and the computer seemed to be holding everything up. You're experienced in it, so you know what we're talking about. Diane, thank you. I just want to get another quick call in. Alison from West Yorkshire, NHS, how do we fix the problem?
I actually have a query about the management situation. I would like to say I retired over 10 years ago, having worked for the NHS for over 30 years. Shortly before I retired, the person who was manager, who was a practical person who had experience of the work on the department, he was given early redundancy. They then replaced him with 4 other people, management banding. We didn't know what they did all day, apart from they went to meetings all day.
I mean, I can't help you out with that because I don't know what was happening in the meetings. But listen, you are the third person in this conversation alone that has brought up the management. So that tells me there's probably something to look at there. The question is, who should be brought in to slim down the management if that is indeed what is needed?
I honestly do not know that anybody can solve it. I don't think the Labour government, I don't think West Streeting will be able to solve that one.
I just wonder whether it's a business person or whether it is a group of doctors that need to come in. Or
there will become a time, I believe, where nurses will become more important than doctors, because all doctors are people who absorb all this information and then they
which
come...
is, Wilfred, quite important, I would say.
No, it's not actually.
When they're wielding the scalpel and you've just gone under by the anaesthetist.
Let me make this point here, because what will happen is this, is the most important thing of caring is nursing.
I agree,
think
yes.
Nursing are so
On
undermined.
a level, if you're going to go get a blood test, to get a nurse to do it.
And then, the
or
doctor...
or a cannula, get a nurse.
The doctor, you'll be able to get... AI will be able to prescribe quite soon, in about the next 10 years, but you'll never be able to take away from the nurse, the caring that they do. They'll be very, very important. So I think if you want to fix the bloody problem, get the people who are actually doing the job.
The hands-on
They
work.
will know the things where the wastage and where you need to be really putting the time and effort.
Okay.
And there's too many managers who are talking theory rather than practically doing the job.
Well, we never come to an answer with the NHS, and maybe that's because it's a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B, and everybody's a little bit right and a little bit wrong at the same time.
Yeah.
Alison, thank you very much for your call on this topic.